Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. All right. So,
does this seem like the place?
yes, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, let's pick up the paragraph that begins afterwards the bread was finished by them. And we'll take that paragraph and work with that for right now.
Okay.
Who would like to read?
Well, I can.
Okay, you're on, Judith.
I am able to. After the bread was finished by them, and again they cried out as before, and again there came to them a beggar who was heavy-mouthed, i.e., for example, he stammered with his speech, and they began to speak with him, and he was stuttering in his speech, and they did not know what he was saying. He knew what they were saying, although they did not know what he was saying, for he was stuttering. He also gave them bread to eat and started to go away as before, and also blessed them as they should be like him, and went away, all as before. Afterwards, there came another beggar whose neck was crooked, and it was as before. Afterwards, there came another beggar who was hunchbacked, and they called him Hoiker. Afterwards, there came a beggar without hands. Afterwards, there came a beggar without feet. For each one gave them bread and blessed them that they should be like him, just like those beggars before. Wow.
Okay, we've got quite a list of what we would call today disabilities. And let's talk a little bit about the notion that the beggars who come to visit, each one has a, if I can use the word disability, although it seems strange to me. Some sort of, you might say, deficit or defect, or something that you would say probably is a disqualification in some sense. Why are all these beggars coming missing feet, or they stammer? Well, let's start with the stammering. What does that suggest?
Moses.
Moses, of course. Why do you think God would pick Moses, who was to be his spokesperson, but was manifestly problematically qualified because of his inability to speak? Couldn't God find somebody who was a better spokesperson? It wasn't Abba Iban available. Why does God pick somebody like Moses?
So was the fact that Moses stuttered something that he could take a lesson from, or something the Egyptians could take a lesson from, or something the Israelites could take a lesson from?
Well, all those are possibilities, but you have to start out by asking the question, why would God pick somebody with a who is manifestly less qualified than any number of other people that could have been picked? I mean, Moses's job was to relay God's message to the Israelites. And in doing so, he had to speak on God's behalf. Somebody who is a stammerer or a stutterer is not exactly the most qualified person for that role.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a try.
Give it a try, please.
Okay, first of all, no one's ready for a job that they get
Okay,
because they haven't done the job.
yes,
And one of my favorite places in the Torah is where Moses is putting the big stake in, the main support. And he says, I'm not able to do this. And
right,
God says something like, you try and I'll help you.
okay,
And so there's this idea that no one is ready for this job. And there's also something more trustworthy about someone where that's visible.
those are all very good
They
explanations.
can't be it's not a matter of finding another God, which we see in Jesus.
Yes, but let's leave Jesus out of it for right
Okay, but
now.
but in the imperfection of this guy,
Yes,
there's something really trustworthy, and also there's such. I just really like that.
yeah, I really like it too. And you said the $1 million word, which is imperfection. Imperfection. God speaks.
Human.
Yeah, human imperfection. God speaks through human imperfection. He doesn't need um, somebody who is uh, supremely qualified. In fact, as we have talked about before, although it's been a while, when it comes to the 10 plagues and so forth, uh, God is demonstrating that he is in charge and can control things, even though uh, you would think that maybe what he is maintaining goes against nature or logic or what have you. God picks somebody for this role of being his spokesperson who is exactly not qualified for the role. It's not just that he's imperfect, but the one imperfection that he has is exactly what you would not expect in somebody discharging that role. God can make use of anyone or anything, including a spokesperson who can't speak or can't speak well. God can get his message through, even though Moses is not the perfect vessel for doing that. What does that suggest? Okay, I see, Judith, I see your hand.
To me, it suggests that if this Schlemiel can do it, anybody can do it if they try.
Yes, if they are chosen by God and empowered by God to do so, the usual criteria that we have
Is God.
just go by the boards. There are the stories about God's involvement with Moses and with other leaders at that time largely have to do with the way in which they discharge their role, even though they seem to be the least qualified to do so. Now, the reason I bring this up is that it has a crucial role to play in our notion of who or what God is. How would picking Moses to be his spokesperson change what we might think about who or what God is? How would our view of God be modified if Moses is his choice to be the spokesperson? Who do we listen to?
We listen to leaders. We listen to people who are articulate. We listen to people who are supposed to be wise.
Yes,
It sort of reminds me of was it the 27 I can't remember, wonderful people who are on earth at all times, and you don't know it, so you have to behave yourself around everybody.
Lamed Vaudniks.
Yeah, right, got it.
So just let's take that as an example. Are any of the Lamed Vaudniks important people? No,
Nope.
they are minor and obscure, and yet they are very important. Who are the people who deliver God's message to the Israelites? Are they important people? Are they impressive people? No, they're not. They're people we would often tend to write off. The question becomes, where do you find God's voice? You find God's voice in very unlikely places, like from a speaker who stammers.
So
Yeah,
can I just go one little step, a baby step forward?
absolutely.
So where is it that we find the wisdom in ourselves?
Can you say a little bit more about what you have in mind, Michael?
Well, I think that a lot of people have the notion that by sort of improving themselves and making themselves perfect people, they
Yes.
will then gather some kind of wisdom.
Uh-huh.
And it's possible that the truth lies a little bit more in people accepting exactly who they are.
I think you're exactly on the right track. We discount ourselves as well as many other people as sources of wisdom or sources of truth or valuable statements because they don't conform to some preconceived notion of who are the right kind of people who represent God. The whole idea of some of the prophets of Egypt is that they have these pyrotechnics that are meant to impress everybody.
Right.
And they certainly must have impressed some people. But are they in fact carrying God's word or God's truth? And the answer is no. The more pyrotechnical they are, the more impressive they are, the less value what they say has for the rest of us who are listening. Where do we find the truth? Where do we find the voice of God? There is a famous quote that I'm sure you are familiar with, which I will remind you of. In Isaiah, we are told that where do we find God? In the still small voice. The least impressive, the least what's the word I'm looking for? The least
Ostatious?
yeah, maybe that would be good. That's what we tend to credit, but that's not where valuable wisdom is found. it's found in the still small voice, which often gets related to our conscience. So we're thought of often as our conscience. So apropos of what Michael was saying, the impressive or the valuable voice where one might find um, statements of truth and of wisdom and so forth are within ourselves. And they are the part of us that reminds us of what we know and what we can understand. It's not necessarily that it comes from outside us in an impressive array of fireworks and so forth, but rather small things which contain with them the impressiveness of truth, even if not the impressiveness of the overwhelming impression of those things which are, we see in, Hollywood movies and so forth, that sort of stuff. Wow, that is an amazing effect. These are not effects, these are tiny little motions that we learn from, despite the fact that they are not overwhelming.
So,
So,
Kerry, it seems to me that just in case we didn't learn the lesson from Moses, after all, he is the beginning of the prophetic tradition. My impression, and I'm not a very good study of the prophets, is that they were all, scruddy looking. They had unkempt beards and they were outcasts in a way. And they all came saying, stop behaving like this. God doesn't want you to do this. And they didn't get much respect because of their physical appearance or whatever it happened to be. So just in case we didn't get the lesson in the first place, we have quite a number of reminders of
I
this
think you're
lesson.
right. There are many reminders along those lines of who we ought to listen to and what we ought to listen to, despite the fact that our inclination as human beings sometimes is to look for the impressive, the overwhelming, the kind of impression that would make you say, wow. There's no wow here.
Right. Even the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the curtain. Look at the pyrotechnics.
That's right. And in the end, it turns out the Wizard of Oz has a fair amount of homespun wisdom to share. And you have to get past the curtain and get past all of the effects that he's able to use in order to hear the actual wisdom that he has. Turns out he's much more valuable than we would have thought. But the value is not in the overwhelming quality of the effects that he can show us. So I think that that's a large part of the truth here. And if you think about it, the whole story of who the people Israel is connected to this. Again and again, we are reminded that God has a relationship with the people Israel, despite the fact that they are not the most numerous or the most powerful or the richest or whatever. There are many other peoples who you think would be better recipients of God's a relationship with God. God picks the Israelites precisely because the Israelite people are small and obscure and without power. And somehow that is a qualifying set for God. It's what makes the Israelites most valuable. Now, why would that be so? Because the whole point is that God can start with anything, anybody, and by selecting them, transform them into something vastly different. God does not have to work with the most impressive, the most powerful. He can take the least impressive and the least powerful and work with them just as well.
Well, but in a way, everyone is like that. Everyone has faults.
Yes.
And like I always found it harder to have students who had a lot of background because they'd have to forget a lot of what they learned before they could go on. So in a way, it's easier.
Yes, I think that's true.
And this paragraph is an example of that, because you'd think that one beggar would be enough, but people are so stuck in their ways of honoring whatever they think they need to honor that we're being beaten over the head. This beggar, and then that beggar, and then this beggar, and then that beggar. Come on, get the message already.
It's very hard for us to get over this lesson about who is the proper vessel to carry God's message.
Yeah.
Or to carry God's wisdom. For most of us, most of the time, we look for the impressive. And think about, for example, in our own day, the way in which the TV preachers work and who are the most successful among them.
The ones who drive the Cadillacs. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's right. You know, this may be apocryphal, but there's a quote that was attributed to Reverend Ike. Has anybody here ever heard of Reverend Ike?
Is he the one from Ike and Tina Turner?
No. No.
Oh, well.
That's a good guess. Reverend Ike was a pastor in Harlem many, many years ago. And he wore diamond rings and he drove a Cadillac and so on and so forth. And people would criticize him by saying, your followers are very poor. How can you go around with all these riches when your people are poor? And he would say, my people love the fact that I have all this stuff because it lets them know that this is what's possible for them. And it's
In the afterlife.
well, he didn't say in the afterlife. He was basically part of the prosperity gospel. And his attitude was, you know, sort of Max Bialystock in The Producers. When you got it, flaunt it. And people flocked to him because he had those signs of success.
Yeah.
And we look at things that way even today. As they say as W says in the Fifth Art of the Roof, when you're rich, they think you really know.
Mhm.
And we're
Right.
still like that.
Right. Yes.
So we have to be beaten over the head with this message that where you find real value is not in the most impressive, but in the least impressive. And we ignore this quite routinely. You know, if you go to the most popular, the most eminent synagogue or church in town, the building is very impressive. It is beautiful. It is magnificent. I used to be the associate rabbi at Temple to Hirsch Sinai in Seattle, and it was an absolutely gorgeous building. It was empty. I don't mean just empty of people, but empty of value.
Yeah.
But if you looked at it, it was very, very impressive.
Just to emphasize the point again from this paragraph, each one of these people with an impairment has something to offer. Every one of them provides bread.
Yes, they provide bread, and they do so despite their physical limitations.
Mhm.
The assumption that we have is that if you have some kind of limitation, you're not able to be of use. And as it turns out, as it's described in this paragraph, exactly the opposite is the case.
And one other point in the paragraph, I missed the previous paragraph last week, but right in the middle it says they should and also bless them, that they should be like him. And it's
Yes.
easy to mistake that that phrase means, oh, you should stutter as well. But actually it means that you should be able to bless and give bread and have the wisdom that is appropriate for this.
Yeah, it relates to the question of what does it mean to be like somebody else, to
Well, I think him is also has a double meaning, like God.
say it again, Kim.
Like him is like God,
Okay.
a double meaning.
It's not capitalized, but.
Right.
Well, I still will go along with Kim's point of view about this. What is it? How should you be like God? Be like God because you can create the universe? Well, no. In what ways can one be like God?
Well, one can see the value in anybody and anything.
Yeah, I was going to say it as the word loving.
Yes, there are qualities like
Accepted.
loving, like respect, like appreciating the truth of somebody's words, and so on. All of which are well within our capabilities and are as important in making God's qualities the qualities that we build our lives on as well.
I think the bread is life.
Well, it is life. I mean, certainly we always say the bread is the staff of life, but particularly where does bread come to play in the life of the people Israel?
Manna.
What did you say, Stephanie?
The manna that
Yeah,
fell in the sky.
bingo. That's exactly where it comes from. And it is a gift, despite the, what should I say, the stubbornness of the Israelites. Now I say that it's a gift despite the stubbornness of the Israelites, because you would say, well, who are the Israelites to deserve getting this gift of manna, this life-saving gift of manna from God? Aren't there more worthy recipients around? Well, maybe there are, but maybe there aren't. But what's important here is that even the Israelites, who are a royal pain in God's butt, are worthy of this gift. And I say this because when we talk about our own growth and our own search for direction, we often discount ourselves because we know all too well our failures and our limitations and the aggravation we cause other people as well as ourselves. And we will say, I'm not deserving of a gift of this sort. And we tend to discount it. But even the Israelites, stubborn and stiff-necked as they were, are worthy of this these gifts. This is important for us in our searches to recall, because we are worthy of the gifts that are available, even though we may be deficient in one way or another. So these 7 beggars are telling us, okay, no feet, you still deserve it. Okay, you can't speak, you're still deserving. All of the criteria that we normally would say, because we know ourselves so well, discount us, are not sufficient to discount us. That's to me a very beautiful way of understanding what this process of growth is. We are worthy of growth. We are worthy of increased knowledge and understanding with all our faults. We don't have to pretend to be better than we are for that to be eligible. So,
Well, and also if you have an inclusive view of humanity, then all of these faults or challenges are all part of one.
yes, they are.
We are all one. That's my view. And it doesn't matter. None of us is perfect.
True.
And we all have a place in the oneness.
Well, which is why we can find value in the lives of, or the words of people who we normally might discount. You take a second look at this person or that person or this group or that group, and you find the opportunity to learn something that is surprising to us only because we set ourselves up to be surprised. We set ourselves up, say, well, so-and-so can't possibly have anything to teach me. Well, yeah, they can. And that's what allows us to get past these various disabilities that are mentioned here in this paragraph. So I mean, I would say that this is a lesson about how to surmount our attraction towards the flashy and the pyrotechnically impressive, and look for value in other parts of life. Now that is not an easy, that sounds like an easy thing to do, but in my own personal experience, it's a very difficult thing to do. It's very hard for us as human beings to escape the idea that truth or wisdom or value is a gigantic thing. It's a big thing. It's something that we have to approach with great awe and solemnity. But in reality, it is a very modest thing. And because it is modest, we have to adjust our own point of view so we can see that value. That is a hard thing to do.
It's a great point.
You know, so
Great point.
you know, I think in the end, what makes it so difficult is that, oddly enough, we put such value in acquiring wisdom, acquiring knowledge, acquiring learning, and so forth. It's hard for us to consider the possibility that it's really found in things that are very small. It's sort of the inverse of what we think is the value of wisdom or growth or learning. We think this is important, which it is. How can it be in something so small, so unimpressive? But the truth is that that is exactly where we're going to find it. And that's one of the big lessons that the rabbis are constantly teaching us with regard to the people Israel itself, that we are valuable not because of the usual criteria with which we judge nations, but because we run counter to the standard way of looking at things. So, you know, it's a way of understanding that what is valuable is not necessarily what appears to us to be valuable, but what appears to us to be small and modest. So that, I guess I would say that is a kind of revelation for most of us, that we're going to find value in the small and the unprepossessive rather than the impactful. And which is not to say that there isn't wisdom in large scale things. There is, but I think that much of what we are looking for is obscured by the very size, the very impressiveness of the package. And somehow getting beyond that is the first order of business. And that particularly as it applies to ourselves. We know all our faults, or at least know a lot of them. How can we take seriously what we think we know? Well, that's part of the problem. When we say, I know how I betray this quality often and without really understanding what I'm doing. And yet, being aware of the failure is itself a basis for the wisdom that we're seeking. So it's not that there is an aha moment where we say, oh my gosh, I haven't recognized this all along for all these years, but rather I recognize how the ways in which I have undermined myself show the value that we're looking for. I know that that's kind of counterintuitive, but I think that's partly what we're saying here.
So, Rabbi,
Yes, sir.
You know, it seems to me that the lessons that you're describing are so valuable. And yet, evolution has led us to be who we are today
Sure.
with self-imposed barriers.
Mhm.
And I just puzzle over why evolution has selected for making this difficult.
That is a great question. Wow. A terrific, terrific question. So let's talk a little bit about evolution. I'm not saying this from the standpoint that I have any special understanding of evolution and how it works. So, you know, I'm totally open for criticism. But one thing I do understand about evolution is that it is mostly about incremental change. That we don't have gigantic revolutionary changes, generally speaking. What we have are small, sometimes, what am I looking for?
Baby steps.
Good, baby steps, right. And we may not even notice that they're taking place until much, much later. And I think this is one of the things that gets in the way of some people when they talk about evolution and what it means. But just the change in the form of a bone structure in the ear, which may seem very small, and it is very small, but which makes possible very important changes. So let's say that the way the world works is that there are these small incremental changes. And what we see is not impressive revolutionary change, but we see, if we pay attention to it, small changes that we may not even recognize at the time, or we may not recognize the implications of. But as they pile on top of each other, as they build on each other, we look at that change from the other end, and we notice that something very significant has happened.
Mhm.
Now, I think that has a lot to do with this question of personal growth, of spiritual development, and so forth. I think a lot of people expect there to be some, oh wow, moment.
Mhm.
And when that doesn't happen, they question the process.
Mhm.
But I think in reality, the way this works is that there are small changes,
Mhm.
and that we may not even notice them at the time, although others may notice them. And gradually over time, these small changes mount up to very important, very deep changes in ourselves. At the time, we may miss them, but looking backwards on a period of time, we may see the direction that we have come from.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, I certainly have had that experience myself. You know, things that I have been working on over the years, and you know, I feel myself, you know, what's happened here? I don't, am I any different than I was a year ago or 2 years ago? And I don't necessarily feel it. But other people will say to me, no, you've changed in this way or that way or the other way. And they notice it because they have a different perspective. I am in the middle of it, so I miss it. Well, maybe that's just what's supposed to happen. You know, so think about this, the notion, what do people say? You shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the better.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of what's going on. We change, and they're little changes, and they make things better, but they're not, you know, gigantic changes.
So, I really appreciate what you're saying, and it is part of my experience that there are little changes that take place. I was trying to ask a slightly different question, though,
Okay, I'm sorry. What?
which is
may I
not
understand?
not our evolution along this path, but if you take a look at evolution more generally, there's an attempt at when random changes occur, that if a change turns out to be better, more efficient,
Mhm.
better survival value, then it tends to be kept.
Right.
So this appreciation of our faults and our spiritual growth does seem to have great value. How come it didn't it evolved only to the point where we have to struggle with it?
Well, I think that in and of itself is its own explanation. I mean, in a way, we struggle with it because it's in the struggle that we see its value. You know, you look at the kinds of things that happen in our lives, ways in which we change, ways in which we would like to change, and so on. And even though we have what we think is a clear path for the direction we'd like to go in, the struggle to follow that path is part of the value of the path. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, from that point of view, we are presented with a kind of odd array of possibilities, and we enter into those possibilities because of our resistance to them.
So what that reminds me of course, is building a muscle.
Yeah,
You have to work at it. It's not like we all have these incredible muscles.
right.
So,
And what is the value? Why do we have to go through the the pain of working the muscle? Why don't we just, when I was a little kid, I used to think, I was going to school, why don't they just develop a smart pill?
yeah.
I'll take smart pill and that would be it. I would know everything I need to know.
So I have an answer for
You do?
this whole
Okay.
thing, Kerry. Oh yeah. If it had been that way,
Yeah,
then we wouldn't have the expression "no pain, no gain."
that's right.
What would we say instead? So seriously.
You say pain? Who needs pain?
No pill, no gain, Michael.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of what, we look around in our lives these days, and people want exactly that, I mean, I think that what we underestimate is not just the value of pain, but the struggle to understand what it is that life presents to us. That when we see the difficulties that life presents, this is not accidental. We are in a position to take advantage of that, because we can enter into the world of indeterminacy, and that is the value of the difficult qualities that we have to struggle with. You want to move in a certain direction. You want to learn a certain quality or a certain bit of wisdom and so forth, but it's hard to acquire. It's not just that there's value in the fact that it's hard to acquire, although that's true. But the value is in entering into the fact that we don't know exactly how it works. We're not sure what to do to make it reality. It is indeterminate. And you have to be able to live with that indeterminacy in order for growth to take place. That's, I think, the scariest thing for most people. It's hard to live in a world where how things are going to turn out is not so clear. We all would like to know exactly what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah.
And because we don't, we might be apt to give up the effort, or we might be pleased with less than a whole loaf. So that seems to me to be pretty standard stuff. We are, all of us, in that position of having to figure out how do we live when we don't know what the outcome is going to be. We know what we would like it to be. We struggle to make sure that it moves in that direction, but we don't know what the actual outcome is going to be. And even when we think we've reached that actual outcome, we're not sure. So
We also misjudge it. I was talking with someone today about how poorly people do who win the lottery. So we think that a certain outcome is going to be great,
yeah.
like getting a job, a particular job, or marrying a specific particular person. You know, any number of things, moving to a place, getting a house.
You
We
know,
don't see the termites.
no, of course we don't, because we're looking for the grand scale. We're not looking for things on the petty scale. Many years ago, some of you will remember there was a program on TV called The Millionaire. And in the premise of the show was that there was this anonymous millionaire,
John Beresford-Tipton.
John Beresford Tipton, that's exactly right. And he employed a guy who would go around like the magazine salesman, and he would knock on people's doors and he would hand them a check for $1 million. The rest of the show had to do with what happened to these people having gotten $1 million. Were their problems solved? Did they learn something? Did their lives fall apart? Who knows what? It was a great show because there was always John Beresford Tipton in the background. I always thought of him sort of watching this happen and having a, I don't know, sort of a Mephistophelian enjoyment watching what happened to all these people now that they had $1 million. And by the way, just in case you're interested, you can watch old editions of The Millionaire on YouTube.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I was just wondering about that.
Yeah.
What was the guy's name who gave out the checks?
His name was Marvin. Oh, gosh.
Okay, never mind. Never mind.
forgetting.
That's okay.
Yeah, it'll come to me. And you know, there was a new star each week because they would have these guest stars who would be the recipients.
It went on for 5 years. So
The show went on for 5 years. That sounds about right. Yeah, well, it's really interesting to watch what happens to these folks. And it's very appropriate for our discussion. Turns out getting $1 million didn't always turn out to be a good thing. So anyway, we're at the end of our time today. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
We'll continue with the same text if that's okay with everybody. I do have a new text in the bullpen. So I want you to know about that.
Okay, let me try. I shouldn't. Oh no, she's gonna freak out. Let her stay in here. Just let her stay in.
What's going on here?
Let her stay in. No, it's not worth it. Now it's.
Everybody's talking at once. I couldn't understand what you were saying.
Sorry, never mind.
Is everybody okay?
Yes, yes, just people chasing cats in my room.
Oh,
That was
okay.
Suki. Not the
All
cat.
right. Have a good Shabbos, everybody. A
Thank
delight
you.
to be with you as always. And we'll see each other next week.